Welcome. This presentation was originally given for the Heritage Open Days 2025 in Woburn Sands, a town just to the southeast of Milton Keynes, Buckinghamshire. I've been researching the history of this area for more than 35 years, and earlier this year I was very generously handed a collection of original glass plate negatives featuring the district, which also spreads over the border into Bedfordshire. They were mostly taken between 1910 and 1912 by the then local chemist Ernest Bathurst. This is him with his wife in later life, shared by a descendant on Ancestry.com. Ernest was born 30th of December 1875 in Tewkesbury, Gloucestershire. He was one of 8 children of a boat building family. By the 1891 census, he was a dealer's assistant, aged 15. In July 1899, he passed his Apothecaries Society exams in London and was therefore able to add MPS after his name as a member of the Pharmaceutical Society. He then drops off radar for a couple of years until a notification in the Chemist and Druggist magazine in December 1906 that he had been working in Birmingham but had now set up on his own and bought the existing chemist's business of Messrs. Horton and Bayes at number 31 High Street, Woburn Sands, and thus he started work in Woburn Sands. Ernest was married in 1907 to Hilda Mary Simons at Rugby, and they quickly established themselves into Woburn Sands polite society, being mentioned as attending whist drives, bowls matches and other local sedate sports and entertainments. Business must have been good, as he was advertising to take on an apprentice by March 1908. Here are a few of the surviving items from his business. He had a passion for photography from quite early on, as he was asked to judge the photography competition entries at the 1908 Woburn Flower and Sports Day. Ernest also took lots of his own photographs, which were to produce picture postcards to sell in his shop. When they came to me, the 80 negatives were housed in their original wooden storage boxes, which had protected them very well, but sadly had some woodworm. The plates have now been cleaned with distilled water and cotton wool and rehoused into conservation grade materials. You can see the amount of dirt that came off some of them. Some were masked up for just the part of the image that Ernest wanted to use for his postcards. Where those card strips were affixed to the glass side, they could be carefully removed, but some have been stuck to the negative side of the plates, so only the loose parts could be removed without damaging the image. So, these pictures. Some are a bit faint, some are a bit dark, but I've left them as they were without correcting the images. I've also included some of Ernest's postcard views that I've collected over the years. I've divided them into some general topics, but before that, these are the images of Ernest's own shop. This was his shopfront at number 31 High Street in about 1912. There are Kodak advert signs on the side windows to the door. He had all the latest stock, as those rubber hot water bottles that are hanging up in the left-hand side window had only been patented in 1903, replacing the old heavy stoneware types. It appears Ernest also made his own mineral waters to sell too. This is a wider view of his whole shop, presumably also about 1912. Note those white fleur-de-lis feathers already in place at the ends of the signboard. These were allegedly erected after a young Prince of Wales used the shop to buy some sweets when he was staying nearby. The owners decided that that transaction meant they had a somewhat unofficial royal warrant. It's not known when that was, or indeed if it actually happened, but the fleur-de-lis feathers still exist today. This is a modern view of the same shop front as it is today. The bay windows upstairs have been removed. The building continued as the town's chemist until 2017, when the chemist's business moved further along the high street. Now, in the autumn of 2025, the Greedy Italian restaurant has just opened in the same building. This is his shop front from a bit later in 1934, used on a postcard. It's now been extended to the left. There are Kodak ads everywhere. He'd also moved with the times and stocked radiograms. Several are in the window on the right, another successful venture. He sometimes loaned out radiograms to the public halls for national events, such as coronations, so that the public could gather round and listen. We're going to start with some of the people photographs that Ernest took. The next few pictures are easily datable. Wood collecting was one of the outcomes of the coal strike that ran from the 28th of February to the 6th of April in 1912. This was the first national strike by coal miners, called to get a minimum wage. After 37 days, the government intervened and passed the Coal Mines Act, extending minimum wage provisions to the mining industry. Nearly 1 million miners then went back to work, but supplies took a while to normalise again. With the Duke of Bedford's woods on the doorstep, locals were soon using every available mode of transport to collect wood to use instead. Coal was essential for everybody's heating, cooking and travelling. In Woburn Sands, the gas company was forced to issue a denial that they were running low, and they actually had a month's stock still in reserve. But the local Oxford to Cambridge train service was drastically cut. The Woburn Sands brickworks were all mothballed, and the local Fuller's Earth mine workers had their hours cut to three-quarter time. Knowing Woburn Sandites, I'm sure quite a bit of wood was being collected from the Woburn estate before the Duke initiated a scheme to charge a nominal fee for it. This raised £2, 2 shillings and 9pence, which the Duke did then return to Woburn Sands Council to be distributed amongst the poorest and most deserving of cases. This fine chap even gets his own name on a postcard. This is William Devereux, then aged 82, collecting his wood. He spent his life as an agricultural labourer and lived in Chapel Street. He also had an allotment on Aspley Guise Common during World War I, where he could be found nearly every day hard at work. He was taken ill there in August 1918 and later passed away aged 89. It must have been the good fresh air that kept him healthy for so long. Other images are unlabelled, so we don't know who this little one was, unfortunately. I can't imagine trying to keep those clothes clean with the facilities they had at the time. For other pictures, we got some good clues. This, according to experts I showed it to, is a 3.5 horsepower single cylinder 500cc Premier motorcycle and sidecar, built in Coventry, which is also where that registration plate was first issued from. Sadly, no records exist of who it was issued to. I wonder, though, if this might be Ernest and his wife. Such a thing would be very useful for him to carry around all his camera equipment out taking photographs. Working class women could supplement household income working between their domestic chores at lace making. In the census of Wavendon in 1861, 1/5 of all females were lace makers, but this work had declined somewhat since then. Lace making was taught at an early age. It was long, repetitive work using whatever free light was available, so often done outdoors, or with 4 girls huddled around a single candle using globes of water to focus the light on their work. The lace dealer would come to their house and buy up what they'd made, paying by the foot, and then selling it on for a handsome profit in the town and city to dressmakers. Working class men had farm work, at least what hadn't been mechanised by this time, building work, brickmaking and fuller's earth mining. This appears to be the rear of number 7 High Street, now the entrance to Tesco's car park off Downham Road. But what it was that these chaps have demolished, I do not know. Or are they just out coursing with the dog? This young chap appears to be dressed as a jockey, possibly for the 1911 coronation celebrations, much more of which we'll come to later on. I don't know who this huntsman was. Several hunts used the area, including the Grafton Hounds and the Oakley Hunt. Unfortunately, we don't know who, what or why this was taken. They look like perhaps draftsmen, architects. There was plenty of building work around Woburn Sands at this time. This is another easily datable event. The Woburn Sands Stars Football Club winning their cup on the 20th of April 1912. They had won all their games except two which they drew, and therefore won their southern section of the Beds League. Sadly, they lost the final against the team that had won the Northern League, Harold, but they still had their own cup. The local newspaper said, "Unusual scenes were witnessed on Saturday evening when the Stars arrived home with their cup. Their supporters were evidently not so disappointed as were the players, and as if they had won the English Cup, they could hardly have had a more loyal reception. A crowd several hundred strong gathered at the railway station. The brakes were quickly illuminated with Chinese lanterns, and headed by the Woburn Sands band playing popular airs, they went in procession to the High Street. Captain Mr. Bob Neville was lifted shoulder high under the lamp in the square, with the cup in his hand. Mr. Saunders of the Swan Hotel filled it with port wine. This was soon drunk, and the cup was filled many times and as many times emptied." But war was just around the corner, and the Woburn Sands Reporter recorded in 1916 that 3 of the Stars team had already been killed. No set of Woburn Sands photographs is ever complete without the woods. The Duke of Bedford's Woburn estate is just south of Woburn Sands. From Victorian times, day trippers came here to walk in the woods and breathe in the famed healthy air, thanks to a Dr. Williams who had written a book claiming the area was ideal for tuberculosis sufferers. Such patients had previously been sent abroad to warmer places in Europe to recover. On a good summer bank holiday, over 1,000 visitors would come, mostly by train, all wanting to wander the woodlands. Of course, they would then spend their money in the local businesses, on tea and cake and souvenir postcards, such as Ernest's. The woodland timber is just a crop, so there are always areas of new planting that have been fenced off, like here on the left. Once open heathland, hence the name Aspley Heath, the first trees have been planted by Francis Moore of Aspley Guise. He was awarded the Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce Gold Medal in 1779 for having planted nearly 60,000 trees. This showed that even land unfit for normal farming could be utilised. Many of these postcard views of the woods could have been taken today. The wide pathways are still there and attract large numbers of people. This, the Green Drive at Woburn Sands, is the wide sandy path that crosses over the top of Aspley Heath, soon after Church Road ends. Aspley Woods at Mermaid Pool is the title on this image, a name much older than you may think, as it was already in use on Bedford estate maps in 1791. The pool, sometimes called Mermaid's Pond, is off to the right of this picture. In his book, Dr. Williams had compared the rainfall and average temperatures in Aspley Guise to several European resorts and declared that Aspley was better. Many wealthy London families started to send their elderly or sick relatives here rather than abroad. This is why several convalescent homes once existed on Aspley Heath, which in turn provided more customers for the local postcards. This looks to me like a view along Sandy Lane, an ancient thoroughfare going up Aspley Heath parallel to Church Road. It once led to an area called Leighton Hollow, where a few cottages stood. There's no sign of them there now. This was a pheasant's drinking pool. It still remains, but in a very dilapidated state opposite Longslade House. Keeping the local game plentiful and healthy was important to the estate so that it could be hunted. Note that this view of the wide path known as Green Drive at the top of Aspley Heath has been titled Reservoir Road at the bottom left corner, something we'll come back to later. Most of these images should be fairly obvious, but there's still some surprises. It seems Ernest didn't venture very far from Woburn Sands with his camera to take his pictures for postcards. This is Fuller's Earth Lodge on Woburn Road, originally a Duke of Bedford's estate gamekeeper's cottage. It takes its name from the mining of Fuller's Earth in the district, which has taken place locally since 1295. As well as the health of his game, the security was paramount for the Duke. Many local people were prosecuted over the years for snaring or hunting on the estate. Poaching was rife in the 1800s. The Woburn to Woburn Sands Road passes just beyond the house. This is also the Woburn Road, a bit closer to Woburn Sands, with the fir tree cottages' white chimneys deep in the trees on the right. This was the first site of the Fir Tree Public House in an earlier building, open here from at least 1753. Previously called the Shoulder of Mutton and then the Greyhound, it is thought to have burnt down around 1840, and then this Gothic-style cottage was built. The same chimneys appear here on the left of this shot of Woburn Road. It's been cleared of snow by a horse-drawn plough. The road was kept clear as an important thoroughfare. It had once been a toll road going between Hotcliffe and Newport Pagnell. Sadly, the glare from the snow has reduced the detail we can see of the figures. Aspley Heath School stood where Aspley Court retirement flats now are. The school opened the same year as St Michael's Church, 1868, funded by the Duke of Bedford with places for 220 children. In the distance between the buildings, you can just make out the roofline of the Swan. One of the cottages on the extreme right is now the Chinese takeaway on Woburn Road. In the foreground on the right was the site of the school's swimming pool in the 1970s when I attended it. By then the school had been extended with a number of temporary classrooms. It closed in the 1980s when Swallowfield School was built and opened at the other end of Woburn Sands just inside the parish of Aspley Guise to keep it in Bedfordshire. The Fir Tree Public House moved down Woburn Road in about 1840 to a site on the crossroads. The first thatched buildings here were replaced in 1889 by this version, which stands today. The elevated hall across the yard was added in 1898 and originally used for auctions, dances and even drill practice by the local military volunteers. After taking over the pub in 1970, my parents had that hall converted to hotel rooms in 1980. You can just make out a horse underneath what is now the carport through the gates of the yard. Across the road junction, in Bucks, stands the Swan. The Swan is on the heraldic sign for Buckinghamshire, so it showed travellers they'd now left Bedfordshire and entered a new county. The Swan was once the farmhouse for most of the land in Woburn Sands. It too can be traced back to 1753, but is certainly much older. It began life as the Coach and Horses when it was on the toll road going through to Newport Pagnell. The cooperative movement shops have had several homes and has moved around Woburn Sands over the years. Here it is while it was at number 7 in the High Street, now, in 2025, known just as number 7, a ladies' fashion shop. Note there was nothing next door to it on the right still. This was before the furniture warehouse was built there, later to be Weatherhead's and now the Tesco's. This is looking down Russell Street towards Weathercock Lane. This is just before Aspley Guise and Woburn Sands Golf Club was laid out in the distance. A newspaper report in 1912 announced that a recreation ground was being considered as children had nowhere to play but in the street, like those shown here. The side streets were known as quagmires of mud in the winter and so dusty in the summer that they had to be watered to damp them down. The half-timbered building, far right, was the home to Woburn Sands' first social club before larger premises were built behind the High Street. It's also been a baker's and an antique centre before becoming a residential property now. This ivy-clad cottage was apparently on Hardwick Road at the edge of what is now Edgewick Farm. The road layout there is quite recent. Hardwick House once stood on Mowbray Green, and the traffic had to turn along Hardwick Place before turning onto the Leys. When the house was removed in the 1960s, a new section of sweeping curve was laid out to bypass those houses. This is Daneswood at the top of Aspley Heath, with two of the nursing staff by the door. It was built as a house for James Charles Cleghorn in 1870, but he sold it in 1891, whereupon it became the Jewish home for consumptives, somewhere London families could send their relatives to stay to recover from tuberculosis. It became a general convalescent home in 1946 when taken over by the Ministry of Health, and it was converted to flats in the late 1970s. Another convalescent home on Aspley Heath, Edgebury, stood near St Michael's Church. It too started out as a private residence for the Allnut family, with a commanding view out westwards from Aspley Heath. After many years of medical, convalescent and then business use, it was demolished and the Charlwood House apartments built on the site in about 2000. It's that Edgebury building that can be seen in the centre of the skyline here from the top of Aspley Hill going towards Aspley Guise. Aspley Heath looks quite barren, it's before the trees fully matured. St Michael's Spire is centre left. In the centre in the distance, a row of cottages occupies what will become the little car park at the bottom of the hill. This area was known as Cheapside, Woburn Sands originally. A similar view, taken from a bit further down Aspley Hill, you may be able to see those cottages a little clearer in the centre of the view. We've now jumped down to the railway station in Woburn Sands, opened in 1846, looking further north towards Wavendon through the crossing. Similarly designed station buildings were erected at several stops on the line, which ran from Oxford to Cambridge until the beaching cuts in the 1960s trimmed it to just Bedford to Bletchley. This station once had extensive sidings for freight, coal, bricks and timber, and the gasworks were nearby too. Through the crossing and down into Wavendon, the leathern bottle can be traced back to 1753 too. This picture shows Ernest Watts and his family, who were then in charge. Ernest ran it from 1890 to 1913 when he passed away, and then his widow was in charge from 1913 to about 1925. He and his wife are both buried in Wavendon churchyard. In 2006 it was extensively remodelled and reopened as the Wavendon Arms, using the coat of arms of the Oddfellows Society, who once used it as their local meeting point. Further up Walton Lane, which leaves Newport Road from beside the Leathern Bottle, stands Wavendon Old Manor, which looks still very much like this today. Wavendon Church has also changed very little. The church is the oldest surviving building in Wavendon, but there is nothing in it identifiable earlier than the 13th century. The west tower was added in the 15th century. This is a nice clear shot of Wavendon's Wheatsheaf Inn on the left, which closed in 1914 after being a public house since the late 1700s. The last landlord was Arthur Tyso, and he bought the pub to live in. That's an R. White's lemonade delivery cart outside. Just off the left side was the entrance to another, much larger inn, the Plough. Coley's grocery shop can be seen on the right. A significantly larger public premises, this is now the Moore Place Hotel in Aspley Guise. It's named after Francis Moore, who came to Aspley as a pupil at the local classical academy but married the headmaster's daughter in 1766 and thus inherited her family fortune. He went on to become very influential in the area. And here are the very attractive Chinese-themed gardens at the rear of the building. This is a rare view of a house called the Mount, which once stood where the road off West Hill in Aspley Guise called the Mount now is. The origins of Aspley Guise Church, St Botolph's, are thought to be Anglo-Saxon, and there was certainly a church here by 1223 when it's mentioned in diocese records. The substantial perpendicular tower is dated from somewhere between 1400 and 1650, although it was restored in Victorian times and houses a set of 6 bells. The oldest church monuments inside it date from around the end of the 14th century. The tomb effigy on the north aisle is thought to be Sir William Tyrington, who was a guardian to the second Anselm de Guise and died in around 1400. The de Guise family added their name to that of plain old Aspley when they controlled the village. Back into Woburn Sands now, and this is Avenue Lodge on Station Road, just by the entrance to Thaden Avenue on the left. I haven't found out who named that road or why, but by coincidence there is a Woburn Avenue in Thaden Boys. This shot is a bit of a mystery. It's looking up past Mill Farm on Mill Lane towards Aspley Guise Windmill. But we know this blew down in a storm in 1900, so it predates the rest of Ernest's photographs and was several years before he was even living in Woburn Sands. Perhaps he was given the negative or even copied an older photograph. Standing on Woburn Road, this is known as the Henry VII Lodge. Once another gamekeeper's cottage, it's now hidden behind a screen of tall trees. Despite the style of architecture, it actually dates only from 1810. It once had a hedge maze beside it, in which Queen Victoria visited when staying with the Duke of Bedford in 1841. The Duchess of Bedford had been one of her ladies of the bedchamber, a personal attendant, since her accession in 1837, and they were great friends. The wide High Street of Woburn Sands developed on one side of the road, as the western side was farmland that went with the original Swan Farm. The garage forecourt still looks like it's a garden here. Being on the toll road and having a railway station, meant Woburn Sands became the commercial centre for all the villages around it. Apart from the Co-op, probably the best known national retailer to have had a shop in Woburn Sands was W.H. Smith. When all news came from print or telegrams, newspapers were vital to everyone who could read. It was still open in the early 1960s, was later operated as a White's, then Four Boys and a Martin's, and is now, in 2025, Daisy Nails. Hopping over to Bow-Brickhill, its church was first mentioned in 1185, and a major renovation occurred there in the 15th century. Having become dilapidated, it was disused for nearly 150 years, but then restored again through the fundraising of Brown Willis, the local Bletchley antiquary, in 1756. The trees have grown up around it far more now. This mystery gate could be any number of woodland settings, but the original index inside the box lid of the negative said that it was in Bow-Brickhill. I wish they'd focused a bit more on the people. This is the only photo in the set of St Michael's in Aspley Heath and shows the rear of the building. Built in 1868 when Aspley Heath began to attract investment and wealthy owners, a new parish of Woburn Sands had to be formed from parts of Aspley Guise and parts of Wavendon. Far more grand, this is the inside of St Mary's Church in Woburn. It was built between 1865 and 1868 for William, the 8th Duke of Bedford, by his architect Henry Clutton, who just finished another church for his patron at Tavistock in Devon. It replaced Woburn's old church, which was apparently too dark and dingy. It was supposed to be on the same site, but they found it didn't quite fit, so they used another site on Park Street, and the original chapel of rest from the old church remains as Woburn's heritage centre today. Another view inside Woburn Church. In 1903, a great gilded wooden reredos was installed, designed by W. D. Carew and manufactured at Oberammergau in Germany. It depicts the Annunciation and the Holy Family. This water tower stands in Ridgemont and was built in 1913 by Brims & Co Limited under a contract from the Duke of Bedford. They also built the pumping station and public swimming baths in Husband Crawley. This cost £1,265 and was actually listed in 1993 as Grade 2 Special Interest. Ernest took several shots of this, and you can see it here with Ridgemont Church in the background. Another red-letter day in the history of Woburn Sands, Aspley Heath and Aspley Guise was the turning on of the mains water supply on the 8th of June 1911. This had entailed a great deal of work. On the same day as the reservoir was opened, a public horse trough was opened in Aspley Guise Square. This is Woburn Sands High Street, right outside Ernest's shop. Giving everyone mains water meant pipes, lots of pipes, embedded in the roads. So while they were installing them in the high street, he must have popped out with his camera gear. The work caused a great deal of interest. A little further along the high street, this is outside the post office in Woburn Sands. And Ernest set himself up for a closer look as well. Thanks to these works, we have the only glimpse I know of the Fuller's Earth horse-drawn carting railway that was once on Aspley Heath, here being used to haul the pipes up. This was used by the miners to get the Fuller's Earth from where they dug it to the refining mill. I think this shot is around the corner of Silver Birches turning onto Church Road. The pipes all had to be connected to the reservoir that had been built at the top of Bow-Brickhill Hill, from where all villages could be supplied by gravity. This was quite a distance from Aspley Heath, and the shortest way was straight through the woods. So the pipes were laid straight down the middle of Green Drive, hence the Reservoir Road reference on the earlier view. It doesn't appear they put them in very deeply. A pumping station had been built on Woburn Lane in Aspley Guise to send the water up to the reservoir. Balfour engineers had drilled 45-foot deep here near Birchmoor to obtain the water, and specialist divers had to be brought in to put brickwork in at the bottom of the works. The whole scheme had cost £25,000 to serve up to 3,000 residents, with a maximum capacity of 5,000. The pumping station sent the water along the pipes to Beaubrickhill, where the reservoir held 390,000 gallons of water. The Duke of Bedford turned the lever to start the scheme, with the engineer Mr. Balfour in attendance too. The dignitaries then had tea made from the water in the reservoir. The local newspaper reported that Mr. Bathurst was there taking photographs. The drinking trough in Aspley Guise Square was opened by the Duke on the same morning. This was erected in memory of the late Miss Courtney, who also had the existing chapel and school buildings just off the camera to the right renamed in her honour. She had died in 1906 after teaching and preaching in the independent chapel there for over 40 years. The trough was paid for by subscriptions from the local Band of Hope and the RSPCA. It had a tap for humans to get a drink from, as well as a trough for passing animals. There doesn't seem to be a clear picture of the Aspley Guise trough taken by Ernest, but this is similar to how it would have looked. This is his image of the Woburn Sands one, which was erected in 1912 in front of Hardwick Road, now Nonna's Restaurant, on the left, and the Swan outbuildings, since demolished, on the right. The rest of Ernest's images were taken on the 22nd and 23rd of June 1911 at the local celebrations for the coronation of King George V and Queen Mary. One of the features of the celebrations was a sports day on the field behind the High Street, lent by shopkeepers Mr. Inwood and Mr. Elliot. Here is the sack race. A newspaper report says that the 100-yard sack race for boys under 16 was won by W. J. Blackerby. Second was R. Smith. Third was T. Mann. I'm not sure if this is the final though, as there were many heats. I thought these lads were bobbing for apples, but the newspaper report says they were bobbing for lemons. First was F. Higgins, second R. Wooding, and third was Harry Homans. Ernest was officiating as a judge at these events, as well as capturing them with his camera. At 3:15, in a field at the back of the Institute reading rooms, kindly lent by the vicar, the youngsters had their tea, and at 4:30 the adults followed suit. On the right are the Woburn Sands band members in their uniforms. Where this shot was taken from is now the houses at the top of Chapel Street. On to the fancy dress contest, part of the grand parade. Sadly, we don't know who these are, but that's Woburn Road on the left in the background, and possibly on the right that may be the entrance to the Henry VII Lodge maze. The girls' fancy dress first prize was won by Ruby Cromack as Britannia, so that's possibly her here in the left-hand picture on the right. The witch won the women's first prize was Miss Mary Page. A similar postcard at Bedford Archives says she got tipsy during the evening and set light to the beacon too early. The men's fancy dressed first prize was awarded to Hugh Baisley, dressed as a lady in a hobble skirt. The buildings in the rear are the houses at the top of Chapel Street. The boys under 14 section was won by Leslie Giles as Perio the Clown. The ladies are unknown. Without phones or TV, people spent a lot of time and effort making their own entertainments. Even Newport Pagnell Cinema didn't open until 1912. This shot of entrance for the fancy dress parade is taken in the rear garden of number 32 Aspley Hill. Here is Hugh Bazley in his hobble skirt again, with several other entrants. I haven't found any reference to the wooden hut they're stood in front of. It may have been erected just for the celebrations. The lady's parasol seems to be decorated with picture postcards. Second in the men's fancy dress was Mr. F. Dickens as Farmer Giles. That doesn't look very comfortable to me. The next two shots are two ladies with decorated bicycles, which had its own section in the contest. From the report, first was Miss G. Brown and second Miss Toogood. But sadly we don't know which is which. There's a different Britannia here from the one we saw earlier. Miss T. Hallworth won Best Float with HMS Empire, which can be seen written on the sailor's hat band. This float had sponsorship from a laundry and ribbon retailer and was being prepared at the rear of the Swan. The rooftop of a house in Hardwick Road could just be seen on the right. This is probably Messrs Pikesley's entry, as there the coster turnout was commended as best cart. A costermonger was a person who sold goods, especially fruit and vegetables, from a hand cart in the street. Another empire float with each of the home nation's national dress represented. Here we can see the coronation procession with all the fancy dress entrants assembling under one of the triumphal arches that they'd built, this one on Woburn Road. Jack Pikesley Jr., who won second place as a hussar, is mounted with Aubrey Chester holding the bridle of the horse. Behind him is a cowboy who won first prize, Mr. C. Inwood. After the early morning church service, the Woburn Sands Band led the school children marching down from Aspley Heath to the square, where they sang Britannia, the pride of the ocean, Now pray we for our country, Hurrah for England, and of course, Rule Britannia. The procession on the actual day of the coronation had been torch lit in the evening, but they had such a wonderful time they arranged to do it again the next evening at 6:30 when it was still light, so these shots must have been taken the next day. The procession of floats and costumes marched down to the station, turned around and came back up to the square again. The crowds followed them back to the square where there was music and dancing until late. The Bathursts went on to have two sons and two daughters, but one daughter died from pneumonia, aged 2, in 1910. That was the same year that Ernest was voted onto the Woburn Sands Parish Council. He went on to serve on it for an incredible 39 years until 1949. He was chair from 1912 to 1935 and oversaw many of the early developments in Woburn Sands and through 2 world wars, although he was fined 10 shillings in 1916 for allowing a fire to show at his premises during an air raid. He died on the 27th of December 1951 at the Woburn Hospital and is mentioned on his daughter's memorial at St Michael's. His business transferred to his son, Eric, known to everybody as Dick, who was also a trained chemist. He ran the business very successfully until 1976 when he retired, and he only passed away in 2005. So 2 generations of Bathursts ran the chemist here in Woburn Sands for 70 years between them. Dick gave these glass plate negatives to somebody local before he moved away to retire. A few were made up into photos by the old Woburn Sands District Society, but most have never been seen more widely before. And that brings us to the end of the show. I hope you've enjoyed it. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments. There are links here to the Woburn Sands Collection website and also our Facebook group.